The American people must know, as the Bible says, that we'll keep our oath, even when it hurts. January 6th was a dark day in the history of the United States Capitol. Lives were lost, and many were injured. But thanks to the courageous action of the Capitol Police and federal law enforcement, the violence was quelled, the Capitol was secured, and we reconvened the Congress that very same day to finish our work under the Constitution of the United States and the laws of this country. Under Article 2, Section 1, elections are conducted at the state level, not by the Congress. The only role Congress has with respect to the Electoral College is to open and count votes submitted and certified by the states. No more, no less. Actually, our founders were deeply suspicious of consolidated power in our nation's capital. We're rightly concerned with foreign interference in our presidential elections if they were decided in our new capital. That's why the Constitutional Convention settled on state-based elections. And that's also why the United States Senate was right to reject the Democrats' latest effort to nationalize our elections just 2 weeks ago. But there are those in our party who believe that as the presiding officer over the joint session of Congress, that I possess unilateral authority to reject Electoral College votes. And I heard this week that President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election. But President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president. Under the Constitution, I had no right to change the outcome of our election. And Kamala Harris will have no right to overturn the election when we beat them in 2024.
I want to be clear here that two things can be true at once. First, yes, it is good that Mike Pence, at the bare minimum, came out and said this. But second, it is a sad state of affairs that acknowledging objective reality that the election wasn't stolen, or that the vice president doesn't unilaterally have the power to change the outcome of an election, is courageous. I don't know that we need to lavish praise on Mike Pence because he didn't break the law and undermine American democracy. That's a pretty low bar to clear. Again, I'd of course rather he came out against Trump than not, but please let's not allow ourselves to think that courage is not undermining the cornerstone of our democracy. I beg of everyone not to let the goalposts get moved that much that simply not helping steal an American election makes you a hero. And of course, Trump responded by issuing one of his "I'm definitely not mad I can't tweet" statements, saying, "Just saw Mike Pence's statement on the fact that he had no right to do anything with respect to the electoral vote count other than being an automatic conveyor belt for the old crow Mitch McConnell to get Biden elected president as quickly as possible." Well, the vice president's position is not an automatic conveyor if obvious signs of voter fraud or irregularities exist. That's why the Democrats and rhinos are working feverishly together to change the very law that Mike Pence and his unwitting advisors used on January 6th to say he had no choice. The reason they want it changed is because they now say that they don't want the VP to have the right to ensure an honest vote. In other words, I was right and everyone knows it. If there is fraud or large-scale irregularities, it would have been appropriate to send those votes back to the legislatures to figure it out. The Dems and rhinos want to take that right away. Our country is going to hell, blah, blah, blah. So Trump says that Pence is allowed to stop certification so long as voter fraud exists. Now, first of all, that is literally not true. According to the Constitution, and not the inane ramblings of Donald Trump, the president of the Senate's job is to open the certification results from the states and instructs that the votes, quote, shall then be counted, at which point Congress counts the votes and the VP isn't afforded any power to overturn them. There is, of course, a way to object, and that's for both a member of the House and the Senate to do so in writing. Then the House and the Senate would meet in separate sessions to consider it, and the objection would only be sustained if both chambers agree to it in a majority vote. If not, the original votes are counted. That's all. There's no special powers afforded to the vice president because he or she unilaterally decides that there's voter fraud or large-scale irregularities. And if someone tells you that the VP does have that power, then they have no clue what the Constitution says. Second of all, also on the issue of Pence being allowed to stop certification so long as voter fraud exists, there was no voter fraud. I get that Republicans are trying to will this into existence by virtue of repeating it over and over and over, but for every time they claim fraud, remember, more than 60 cases in the courts and not once was a single case of fraud proven, including in front of a number of Trump-appointed judges. Trump's own DHS said there was no fraud, Trump's own DOJ, led by Bill Barr, said there was no fraud, Republican secretaries of state said there was no fraud. Every last recount and audit in all of the disputed states proved that there was no fraud. So Republicans will say it because they treat their own supporters like they're morons, and that's their prerogative, but in reality, they have exactly zero facts to back that claim up. And finally, with regard to reforming the Electoral Count Act, that's not evidence that it does give the vice president the ability to reject the election results. It's evidence that if it's not crystal clear and explicit with zero ambiguity, that a desperate authoritarian will try to exploit it for his own personal gain. That's all that proves. It's not a condemnation of the law. It's a condemnation of Trump and his party's utter contempt for democracy that we have to go back and make sure every last word is airtight because we already know that a bunch of autocrats will try to undermine it. And look, I could go on refuting Trump's statements line by line, but you get it. It is the unintelligible ramblings of someone who quite literally has zero clue what the fuck he's talking about, which is nothing new. But here's the real point here. The onus is on the DOJ and Merrick Garland and attorneys general in states like New York and Georgia to uphold the law and hold Donald Trump accountable for the crimes that he committed, often in broad daylight. Whether it's as a tax cheat or asking the Georgia Secretary of State to find 11,780 votes, exactly one more vote than he lost by, or inciting an insurrection on the US Capitol. Because if they don't, then that will not only serve as the basis for him to claim complete and total exoneration, like he often does, but it'll be tacit permission for him to do it again. And for those who think that that couldn't possibly happen, take a look at January 6th and tell me it's impossible. The only difference is that now, even those on the right who resisted Trump's autocratic efforts are being purged. So if your job is to uphold the rule of law, then forget about politics and do your jobs. To see more videos like this, click the subscribe button right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work, subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I cover the most important stories each week, and my guest is always one of the top political figures, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Cory Booker, and so many more. The podcast link is also right here on this screen, so give it a listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.